I recently attempted a 600-kilometer bike ride. Note the word attempted because it definitely was an attempt. Here's how it went. We were released at about 4:30 a.m. in the morning, so there was a little bit of night riding. And for this 600-kilometer Audax, I had a few goals. First goal was to conserve as much energy as possible. That meant staying at the back, only going as fast as my zone 2, and monitoring my heart rate the whole time. Second goal was to do as little stops as possible. I wanted to do well for this 600-kilometer Audax. So I wanted to test my limits and see how fast I could do this distance. So limiting my stops was a big part of that strategy. After the first few kilometers, I found myself riding with Homer Lim. I believe he is the first Cebuano to finish Paris-Brest-Paris ever. I'm not sure. I think that was over 9 years ago, and I think he did it again in the last Paris-Brest-Paris. I really enjoy riding with Homer, but I think I enjoyed it a little too much because I broke my first rule almost right away. I found myself in front of the group with him. So after talking to him a little bit and monitoring my heart rate, it was much more prudent for me to stay in the back, where I would be exerting so much less effort for the same speed. I'm gonna stay out of the wind now. After hitting the 50-kilometer mark, we kept going. I was able to stay in the group, chatted with a few people, and spirits were high. Since there was a lot of chatting and a lot of going through somewhat unfamiliar environments, like I've been there before, but it's not a route that I usually do, it felt like a fast 100-kilometer ride. I mean, it wasn't the fastest in terms of speed, but it sure felt fast. The time just flew by really quickly because there were so many other people around. And here's the 100-kilometer mark. At this point, most of the group decided to stay and take advantage of the free lechon. I decided to keep going. Just finished at the 100-kilometer checkpoint. Good thing I was able to hitch a ride for most of that. And we'll see if I'll be able to hitch again. I'm gonna guess that this is when it starts getting a bit difficult. 500 kilometers more to go. And eventually, I caught up with Gary. But before we get to Gary, I'd like to talk a little bit about this video sponsor, Curve Coffee Collaborators. The last video I made for Curve, I showed the Toddy Cold Brew system comboed with the Curve Cold Brew blend. This combination is the easiest way to make cold brew at home. Or, if you have a commercial space but no espresso machine or grinder, you can easily make quality coffee with this combination. I might actually do that. Anyway, I saw this exact starter kit on the Curve website, curve.coffee. Check out the site. For only 2,950 pesos, you can get started making quality cold brew. Thanks, Curve, for sponsoring the vlog. Okay, let's get back to Gary. Funny story, Gary is the guy I met in Ultra Gravel. He was the guy with the aero bars on the mountain bike. Gary! From Ultra Gravel. That is what is great about these cycling events. Even if you go solo, you are bound to meet somebody going at your own pace. So I ended up riding the next 50 kilometers with him, and it was a pleasure. After hitting the 150-kilometer point, we decided to sit down real quick and grab a Coke. Then, two things happened. As soon as we left the checkpoint, it rained. That was the first thing. I was happy about that one because my body temperature was starting to heat up. The second thing that happened was I got a flat. Unbeknownst to me, it would be the first of many. So we quickly patched it and we went on our way. Not bad, not bad. You think they could have left some trees here? It's a good thing the sun hasn't been out that much. After watching Dylan Johnson's Unbound video, I really like his videos, I noticed that he had a cooling strategy. In the past, I would just sit through the heat and eventually it would be so hot that I would be feeling pretty bad and slow. And then I would start dousing myself with water. This time, I made sure to include a cooling strategy in my plan. So every checkpoint, I always refilled my water. And whenever I could sense the heat starting to pick up or that my head was starting to get warm, I would quickly douse it with water from my water bottle. And in fact, one of my water bottles was those insulated types that could stay cool. So in case I found cold water, at least the cold water could stay cold and that would help cool me as well. And I think this strategy helped me stay fresh and keep my power output high for a lot longer than I normally would. So that was a cooling strategy, but that strategy did not help against another puncture. In retrospect, I might have been too optimistic on my spare inner tube setup. I only brought one spare tube and a bunch of patches. For future long Audax rides, that is something that I would definitely change. So let me talk about my tire setup. I paired my Kenda Valkyrie Pro tires with XR TPU inner tubes. And here's the problem with my setup. These are the XR TPU inner tubes and here are the patches. And what would happen would be I'd patch it and then after a while, I don't know if it's the heat on the tire or because of the really long distance, so the heat starts to build up. But after a while, if you don't patch it right, some air comes out through the patches. Like it'll just find a way out eventually. And that is what was causing me problems later on after a few punctures. But I still think the TPU tubes are a great thing to have. So imagine if I brought the regular butyl tubes, I wouldn't have been able to patch it. Number one, I don't know how to patch butyl tubes. I tried it once and I got so frustrated that I gave up. So if I got the same number of flats with butyl, those regular tubes, my day would have ended after my second puncture. With the TPU tubes, I was able to stretch that out because I could just patch it. Even if those patches ended up failing in the long run, I was still able to stretch one spare inner tube a lot longer than I could have stretched one spare butyl tube. I don't really know how to pronounce that. But in the future, I would likely go with a tubeless setup. I wouldn't use a 700 by 30 anymore. Probably a 700 by 33 or 35, something with more volume because I haven't had good luck with tubeless for smaller road tires. I've tried using tubeless with your typical road tires and it would seal the puncture, but after I put air in and I let it go back to its original pressure, then the sealant would pop and then the puncture would continue and it would reseal and then you'd put air back in, it would pop again. So I don't know, I don't have good experiences with that. But if you do have road tires with sealant, I would be interested to know what your road tire and sealant brand combination is. Maybe you know something I don't. So for future long Audax rides, the bigger volume tire like a 33 or 35 would be more comfortable and would allow me to confidently use tubeless. Then I could bring like 2 to 3 TPU tubes with patches. I think that should be fine. But anyway, that's for the future. For the last Audax, here's what happened. After fixing the puncture, this group caught up with us and I gotta say I was jealous. They had proper long distance setups on their bikes. Aero bars, bike bags, mud guards, and most importantly, they were clearly working together as a team. They even had matching jerseys. And this would be another thing I would change for future long distance rides. More on that later in the video. Then shortly after riding with those guys, we hit the 200 kilometer mark and I did not take footage of the 200 kilometer checkpoint. Well, here's why. Not gonna lie, I had to use the toilet in McDonald's. I honestly feel really good. Really good. I am very hopeful that I can do the 600 well. At this point, I lost Gary when I scrambled to McDonald's, so I couldn't find him anymore. So I just kept going. Take note of my headspace here. I was clearly feeling pretty good, but you could see that my goal was more than just to finish. I wanted to do well. What did well mean in my mind? I didn't really have a number attached to it. I was thinking that I could finish in 24 hours, although that was really unlikely. But that was something that I wanted to do. If I did, it would be very close to the course record. So it was very unlikely, but like I said, I wanted to do well. Well for me. And that basically meant trying to ride the whole distance with as little breaks as possible. And at that point in time, despite all those punctures, I genuinely thought that was possible. So I'm foreshadowing a little bit, but again, this is something I want to address later on in the video. Now we're doing the long, gradual climb up to Bareilly. I think I have like 220, 230 kilometers. 380 more to go. Lovely. The Cebu 600 kilometer Audax is highlighted with a bunch of long climbs. So I found these local guys, they were cycling, they lived around that area, and they just paced me up the climb and provided me with someone to talk to. They were nice kids. And then I had another puncture. I fixed it, reached the top of the climb, then I refueled in the middle of the downhill. Refueled, and the water that I bought had so much ice in it that I'm gonna put it in my jersey so that I can keep myself cool. Front part of the jersey, because Arrow, if you watch Dylan Johnson. Let's go. The sun is going down soon, so I'll try to get some footage. So traffic. Halfway point. Alright, so we're night riding. It is very dark. Very, very dark. This was something I was curious about, and maybe you have some insight about it. So I took video of my cyclocomputer, and I want to point out my heart rate. I noticed a weird phenomenon that when I do really, really long distances, let's say more than 200 kilometers, I notice that my heart rate can't get up anymore. Like, it becomes unusually low. Obviously, the legs at this point in time did not feel great, but my legs were not totally destroyed either. I could still do good speed, but I couldn't get the heart rate up, and I wasn't trying to do like a threshold effort or anything. I was just trying to keep it steady. But I did notice that my heart rate was unusually low for the effort. It's probably just a good indication to take a short break or something. Anyway, if you have any insight, let me know in the comments. I'm just curious about it. And shortly after, this is when things started to unravel. It's another flat. This time I was going at speed and can't really see the road because it's really dark. And then all of a sudden,
the roads were really bad and I was going at speed and just jumping all over. And as soon as I got through the really rough bit, back wheel had no air. I'm gonna change it. I'm pretty tired. I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, pinch flat.
I managed to patch the 4 holes, but here's where my headspace was at.
I'm not gonna lie, man, I am pretty frustrated right now. I mean, I was probably lucky that I didn't crash when I went through that rough bit. Like, it was all I could do just to stay on the bike. But as soon as I got off, wow, 2 pinch flats. Crazy. There was a point when I was fixing the flat. I didn't know there was another pinch flat. I just thought it was 1 pinch flat. And the tube still didn't inflate. And I was like so close to just calling my wife and asking her to pick me up. Alright, let's get to the 400 kilometer mark and reassess.
Then, the nail in the coffin.
It's another flat. It's the pinch flat from earlier. The hole is pretty big, and since there's 2 holes next to each other, the stickers are kind of overlapping. Anyway, it's not working very well. Let's see if I can fix it. Hi!
I ran out of patches to continue on. At this point, I had done about 350 kilometers. And as soon as I called my wife, I had mentally called it quits. So here's what I would change about this ride. I already mentioned that I would go tubeless with bigger tires. I already mentioned that I was jealous about those guys who were clearly cycling together almost like a team. Obviously, the effort is so much easier because you can spread it out as a team. But more important, when cycling with other people, it is mentally so much easier as well. When doing an Audax by yourself, you get to a point where you start talking to yourself, which is fine. And in fact, I feel like it is something that you're gonna have to learn to do if you're gonna continue to do long Audax rides. But since it was my first 600 kilometer ride, it would have been more prudent to do it with other people. For my mental state as much as my physical state. So, staying on topic on my mental state, the next thing I would change is the big one. I approached the 600 kilometer distance. I feel like I approached it with the wrong mindset. Because I approached it with the idea of doing well, of doing the best I could possibly do. And there's nothing wrong with that mindset. In a way, it's a racer's mindset. But it also kind of backfired on me. Since I was hell-bent on doing well, I ignored the fact that when I had my last puncture, I still had so much time to finish. I punctured at 10 p.m. in the evening, but the cutoff for the 600 kilometer distance was 8:30 p.m. the next day. So there was actually plenty of time, despite the puncture, despite not having any more patches, because really, I could have just waited on the side of the road. And even at 10 p.m., there were so many cyclists still on the road coming my way. All I needed to do was wait and just ask people if they had a spare inner tube. Then I was only 50 kilometers away from the 400 kilometer mark, which was where I had spare supplies, a bed, a shower, my kids and my wife were even there. I would have been able to rest, restock, and be on my merry way for the last 200 kilometers. But since I was frustrated from fixing so many flats, from not being able to execute my plan, my mind was not in a good state. I was deeply frustrated and tired. And even though I felt pretty good physically, I mean, about as good as you can feel after 14 hours of pedaling. Mentally, I was beat. It felt so much easier to give up. I actually only realized this the next day because at about 4 p.m. the next day, I visited the finish line and then I saw someone finish the distance. Then I asked the organizers, "What time is the cutoff?" They said it was still at 8:30 p.m. So I didn't realize that I had so much time to handle all of those problems, those puncture problems, the mental problems. That's when I realized that my mindset should have been different. Instead of trying to do as best as I could, I should have just had the mindset of just trying to survive. If I had the mindset of survival, I feel like I would have finished. Anyway, that's how it goes. There's always another one. I'll probably attempt another 600 eventually. Maybe not anytime soon. Although there is one event I want to join. We'll see. Anyway, I still managed 350 kilometers. That was good enough for my second longest ride ever. And still happy about that. Still was a good experience. All right, more videos soon. Subscribe to the newsletter over here. Ciao!
Kanina lang pagkagaling ng pagsabi mo sana'y tayo na
Live, di ko i-live eh.
kanina lang pagkasaya-saya ng buhay kong bigla